good morning, and thank you all for your presentations this morning. I suppose you have mentioned a couple of themes that we hear regularly as common across all sectors in society, and that is the lack of data on disability in communities, and also the lack of training on disability, and indeed in this case mental health. I know you mentioned here the committee, Irish Prison Penal Reform, you say heard that 1 in 3 people in Irish prisons screened positive for intellectual disability, so it could be greater. And I know you say that we need a system for collection of data, so I'm just wondering, have you envisaged what kind of system or how would that work? Because I'm sure there are many people here with an intellectual disability who also have a mental health illness, and so it's, you know, it's to gather information on those, because how do you solve a problem if you don't know the extent of it? So I'm just wondering on that. The other, the Mental Health Commission, you provide inspections of approved centres. Are all prisons considered approved centres? Or, because we have to realise that a large number of prisoners have mental health issues. That's been said here before. So are all prisons considered approved centres, or are they inspected? Because it was mentioned here as well that a general prison inspection report hasn't been seen since 2014. And I'm just wondering, have all these reports been, have all the reports been gathered but not published? And if that's the case, why? Because that's worrying. I mean, why are these reports not being published? And if we don't know the extent of the problems in the prisons, how can we actually deal with them? And maybe you'd also expand on the higher level task force and diversion, because a number of you mentioned that, and I'm just wondering, you know, you seem to think that this will be a good report and a good it will be something good to happen, but if it's not resourced properly, because you talk about the joint working group of mental health service and the police, and 12 years on that hasn't made any changes, because was it not that it wasn't resourced properly as well? Is that the case, or it wasn't implemented? So I'm talking, we've lots of different reports. If they're not properly resourced and properly implemented, they won't make the difference that they're supposed to. So I suppose it's, what advice have you got for us as committee, or indeed for members of government, on how to move these different things forward as well? Because, as I said, you could have reports coming out your ear, but unless they're implemented and properly resourced, they're not going to make the difference that they should be making. So thank you.
I'll just address the system of data collection that you spoke about. Yeah. IPRT launched Progress in the Penal System 2021, which is our annual report, in February. And this year focused on, well, last year even, it focused on transparency in the penal system, so specifically on data and data collection systems. And we propose that basically all the criminal justice system in general should have a system of data collection, of equality monitoring, that is in line with the CSO. And staff and prisoners should be trained, basically staff on one end as to why they're collecting the data and how they can support prisoners in collecting that data, and prisoners in how basically it would benefit them in their everyday life in prison to, I suppose, disclose this type of data to staff in prison. So that's what we've recommended in the Progress in the Penal System report, which we can send over to you guys at a later date. So that, and we've also recommended in the race and ethnicity recently launched report as well in terms of ethnicity data.
Well, I can briefly speak to data. Definitely the lack of data across the whole system, the Irish system, is something that we need to increase. But in terms of justice, in fairness to them, they're one of the lead departments that actually is concentrating on trying to put data across the system, but it hasn't been successful to date. I often wonder, like, if you didn't have the information right on your arrest warrant or transfer warrant that's required in law, you know, you'd be released. So why not change the law to include that if there is specific data in relation to disability, that should be on the, and where it's available to the state previously, that should be there. That's one potential way. I'll hand over to Susan in terms of inspection.
Yes, you're right. We do inspect approved centres, and we produce a report after our visit, and this is published. We don't have any jurisdiction in the prisons, and that is the function of the Inspector of Prisons, who does do inspections with his team, and produces reports. The decision to publish the reports, I believe, but rests with the Minister, so of Justice, so I have no further information on that. However, it had come to my attention, and through the previous Inspector of Prisons, about the extent of mental illness in the prisons. And so we, through her assistance and help, we did actually visit the prisons, and I was able to go with her as part of her inspection. I'm able to write the report on circumstances in the criminal justice system for people with mental illness. But we don't, the Mental Health Commission don't have any jurisdiction in the prison. That is the Inspector of Prisons.
And that as well, it's our understanding that the decision to publish rests with the Minister for Justice. So these inspections have been carried out, and they are routinely carried out by the Inspector of Prisons, but they have not been published. But what we did see were inspection reports, very detailed inspection reports published around COVID-19, so around all the different prisons, and those have been incredibly useful and informative, because we think there should be transparency, that these reports should be published, and that really would lend us a real oversight into what's happening in the prison. We also understand that the legislation to put in place the National Preventative Mechanism to ratify the optional protocol against the Convention Against Torture is imminent, very imminent, is my understanding, and that would, that would broaden things out to ensure that people who are detained in health facilities as well would also fall within the remit of that new preventative mechanism that would be coordinated by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission. So I think that is something to look at, and that is something that we have called for quite a lot of time. And obviously, also the other thing I would say is the UN Human Rights Committee will be examining Ireland next week in Geneva under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So we have made a submission on that as well, and it deals with some of those issues, so we can send that on to the committee.
Collection. There was a report carried out by Claire Edwards and Professor Shane Cook-Commons by the National Disability Authority. It's going back a number of years, but in that there was a recommendation in the findings that there should be data collection at entry point into the criminal justice system. I think perhaps he mentioned a possibility of Pulse collecting some sort of data in relation to that, because the anecdotal evidence has suggested that people have ended up in court, and sometimes it's not until that stage that it becomes apparent that somebody has a disability. So I think An Garda Síochána also have a really important role, that if they can identify, early identification, all the other agencies in the system can be made aware, and maybe, some cases mightn't have to proceed as far as they do.
You mentioned the high-level task force. So is it Kathleen Lynch?
Yes.
It's chaired, what it is it's the Gardaí, the prison services, members of the Department of Justice, civil servants in the Department of Justice, civil servants in the Department of Health, and a few other people, and they've a whole area that they're looking at in terms. So we would have raised these areas with them, and the Gardaí, and they're looking at different areas, a task force that they can actually put actions in place. So one of those, for example, was the diversion programme, but that was must be a year now, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, the idea was they were going to pilot that in Limerick to see if we could run it out in the rest of the country. But again, very often the interactions between different state agencies, who funds it? Is it health? Is it justice? But I must say, it was the first one I got from the Gardaí and the leadership in Limerick. They were really determined to put it in place. And it sounds like a good idea. So that alone happening would set a trend, I think.